Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
And welcome to this day at Quimper Unitarian Universalist Fellowship. Whoever you are, wherever you're from, whomever you love, and whatever your faith tradition, you are welcome here. My name's Jean Walat, and I'm a member here at QUUF. I'd like to begin the service by acknowledging that the water, land, and the shorelines here in Port Townsend are the traditional territory of the S'Klallam and Chimicum peoples. We honor and acknowledge our indigenous members and neighbors, and we vow to help restore and sustain their homelands. As we call in this time together, let's settle our minds and calm our hearts with the ringing of the chime. It's good to be together. I'd like to welcome two of my favorite people, Kristin and Otto Smith, who will lead us in our call to community, hymn number 95, There Is More Love Somewhere. And please stand as you are willing and able.
There is more love somewhere. There is more love somewhere. I'm gonna keep on till I find it. There is more love somewhere. There is more hope somewhere. There is more hope somewhere. I'm gonna keep on till I find it. There is more hope somewhere. There is more peace somewhere. There is more peace somewhere. I'm gonna keep on till I find it. There is more peace somewhere. There is more joy somewhere. There is more joy somewhere. I'm gonna keep on till I find it. There is more joy somewhere.
I'd like to welcome now our guest speaker today, Melody Moberg. Melody is a lifelong UU and a candidate for ministry, originally from central Wisconsin, like some of you. She received her Master of Divinity from Seattle University School of Theology and Ministry in 2022, this year, and Melody previously worked as Director of Family Ministry at University Unitarian Church in Seattle. Melody?
Yeah, thank you so much, Jean. I'm honored to be a guest speaker at Quimper this year. Please join me now in our chalice lighting words. They were written by Eric A. Heller Wagner. Blessed is the fire that burns deep in the soul. It is the flame of the human spirit touched into being by the mystery of life. It is the fire of reason, the fire of compassion, the fire of community, the fire of justice, the fire of faith. It is the fire of love burning deep in the human heart, the divine glow in every life. Our opening words are lyrics from the Chalice Camp song by Lila, Ibrahim, and Rumi. It's a blessing you were born, and it matters what you do. What you know about God is a piece of the truth. May the beauty you love be what you do, and you don't have to do it alone. Now please join me in a responsive reading by Lisa Friedman. Spirit of life and love, we live in a fragmented world that tempts us to despair. We would put it back together, piece by piece, if it were ours to choose. But sometimes the fragments are enough. In a world of cruelty, there is still power in every act of kindness. In a time of doubt, there is still power in every act of hope. In an age of division, there is still power in every act of unity. May we remember that sometimes the fragments of meaning we make are just the right size to hold in our hands. I'd now like to welcome Renee Nugent, one of our RE teachers.
Good morning. I'm filling in for Bo this morning. And at this time, the children will go to their RE classes. So those in the center aisle, could you please make an arch? And we will sing out the children.
Thank you, Renee. What we'd like to do now is acknowledge and welcome those of you who are visiting with us for the first or second time. If you're online with us, you're invited to say hello in the chat section, which you can find on the right side of your screen or at the bottom if you are out of full screen mode. And if you're attending in person, if you would please rise so that we may welcome you. Welcome, everyone. And we're really glad you're with us today. We'll now receive the offering, which today goes to St. Vincent de Paul. St. Vincent de Paul provides assistance to people in need. They help with things like food, gas, prescriptions, dental and medical needs, repairs, clothing, laundry. I've gotten to work with them in the last 5 years, and they are really just a terrific bunch of people who really are there on the ground for people as they try to get through their day or their week. And if you're in need of help, anyone who's hearing this, reach out to them directly at 360-379-1325. And they're also right now in need of some volunteers as well as funds, so please consider helping and donate as generously as you can. Thank you. Oh, and if you'd like to donate, you have a few options. So for people here, the ushers will now come among you and receive the offering directly. For those viewing online, you can text the amount you'd like to give to the number that's now showing at the bottom of the screen, Or you can go to our website, that's quuuf.org, and click on the giving link. Or you can just mail a check to QUF and remember to put offering in the memo line. And we'll now gratefully receive your offering as we listen to Kristin and Otto play a classic 18th century Irish air by Turlough O'Carolan. It's called The Draught. Thank you, Otto and Kristin. We have one announcement this morning from the auction committee. We are unbearably excited to announce this year's auction theme, Teddy Bear Picnic, and can't wait to share all the fun ideas we've been working on. So please start thinking about some auction ideas you may want to donate, and check out the weekly update for donation forms and to keep up to date with the freshest news. We'd love to have picnic baskets to auction as well. So if your team or committee or affinity group or covenant group would like to put your heads together and create a fun themed picnic basket, we would be very grateful.
Thank you so much, Jean. We will now share our joys and sorrows, recognizing that our personal joys and sorrows are only a fragment of the joys and sorrows of life in the life of this larger community. And thus we place this first stone honoring the indigenous people who populate our land. On October 10th, we honor all Americans who lived here long before Europeans colonized the land. And now within the congregation, the RE Committee and Green Sanctuary light a candle of joyful community for the beautiful Harvest Fest this past Friday evening. It's good to celebrate this season with you. And now we place a final stone, holding in our hearts the joys and sorrows I've just shared, but also thinking of such joys and sorrows among us that are unexpressed, but of no less importance. I invite you now into a moment of silence. Today's reading is from the journalist Krista Tippett, entitled On Hope. Hope is, for me, distinct from idealism or optimism. It has nothing to do with wishful thinking. It is a muscle, a practice, a choice, to live open-eyed and wholehearted in the world as it is and not as we wish it to be. We are strange creatures. We mask fear with rage and despair with violence. Growth is always messy, never linear. We have far to go to live into our name, Homo sapiens, the creatures who are wise. Yet I know that in life and society, wisdom emerges precisely in those moments when we have to hold seemingly opposing realities. Power and frailty, birth and death, pain and hope, beauty and brokenness, mystery and conviction, calm and fierceness, mine and yours. Our special music today is a Venezuelan waltz called Via Rosa by Marcario Gonzalez, performed by Otto on concertina and Kristin on violin. This congregation is truly blessed with beautiful music and wonderful musicians. As a Unitarian Universalist religious educator, I struggled to make lesson plans about certain subjects. One of these subjects is climate change. Addressing climate change with children feels so tender. They're inheriting a world where the stakes are very high and old solutions are no longer viable. I struggled to create lesson plans which laid out the real stakes of climate change and expressed the ways adults have failed to contain it. Children are aware of climate change and scared by it. I wanted to offer education, inspiration, and comfort. I struggled to imagine stories, activities, art projects, or service projects that could help children learn about climate change and feel agency rather than despair. I struggled because climate change is an existential threat that becomes more real every year. It's an existential threat which compounds existing inequities. Climate change disproportionately impacts people of color, people with disabilities, and those at the margins. I struggled most of all with how to create lesson plans that expressed hope, real hope, hope that I myself felt viscerally, hope that is honest. It doesn't feel honest to say that climate change is something that we're guaranteed to stop. I fantasized about being a religious educator in the 1970s, about making lesson plans about the environment that didn't yet have to deal with climate change. When faced with the particular challenges of our time, it's very tempting to romanticize the past. I imagined making environmentalist lesson plans in the 70s would be simple. I could make lesson plans about recycling, picking up trash, or turning off water when you brush your teeth. I wished small personal actions felt like the right-sized solutions for the planet. Of course, fantasies ignore things. My rose-tinted fantasy of the 70s didn't include the existential threats of nuclear waste and war. I don't know what it's like to be surrounded by polluted rivers, lakes, and waterways. And I don't know what it was like to be an activist in the 1970s and to struggle with the existential threats of its time. Hope is a complex thing. We're living through uncertain times. The stakes are very high and things often look bleak. Roe v. Wade overturned, threats to bodily autonomy, racism, injustice, violence, climate change, threats so vast and existential it's hard to wrap our minds around them. And our minds weren't designed to process threats this big so often. Stakes are high, and yet we live in an overwhelmingly optimistic culture obsessed with the individual consumer. Since I was young, I've been presented with narratives sharing how threats to the environment can be solved by individuals like me. Narratives that things look bad, but if you just buy the right kind of reusable water bottle or stop using straws, you can change the world. These are consumer solutions to big problems. And in our culture, focusing only on consumer solutions protects the corporations who most endanger the planet. Unfortunately, there's no single action one ordinary person can take that will stop climate change. Narratives of hope that are based on these singular consumer actions that say otherwise are false or incomplete. Sometimes hope is insincere, like forcing a smile. We're in an optimistic society which seeks to ignore and numb pain. Maybe this pain is grief for the environment. When pain arises, we're asked to look on the bright side, grit our teeth, move forward. We're asked to drown pain through work, distractions, and addictions. It's particularly American to numb pain through making money and spending money. All the while, culture calls on us to be shallowly optimistic and hopeful. We're meant to be always making ourselves better, finding hope in makeovers, get-rich-quick schemes, face serums, remodeling projects, self-help books, and biohacking. We're meant to be always optimizing ourselves and making ourselves more marketable. The Reverend Nancy MacDonald Ladd grapples with the complexity of hope as optimism in her book, After the Good News, Progressive Faith Beyond Optimism. She begins with a story of a failed utopia, of the attempt by the 19th century optimist Robert Owens to create a utopia of his own vision in MacDonald Ladd's hometown of New Harmony, Indiana. Owens was a wealthy industrialist and self-identified social reformer. He was convinced by the brilliance of his own ideas and his own ability to create a world which reflected them. He knew he could create a utopia of shared property, intellectual advancement, and educational reform. Owens purchased land in New Harmony and recruited East Coast intellectuals to populate the community. He collected brilliant poets, scientists, and philosophers who felt ready to shape a new society. And Owens also posted an ad to the newspaper inviting commoners to join, an ad that welcomed all who sought to build a new community. Notably, the ad excluded people of color from joining this new utopia. Robert Owens' utopia didn't last long. His group of white intellectuals didn't include farmers, and it didn't include people with practical knowledge about how to sustain a rural community. Local artisans and farmers were reluctant to sign up for Owens' project, which they saw as both paternalistic and impractical. Though all were supposed to labor equally, the intellectuals shirked their duties. A utopia which claimed socialist values inevitably came on their own stated principles and reflected the hierarchies and inequities in American culture. The intellectuals held power and property. Workers did all the laboring. Racism prevailed, and Robert Owens, despite his non-hierarchical vision, still, quote, found himself holding the roles of bank, landlord, and overseer. In this story, Robert Owens had a lot of hope in himself, in his own ideas, and his own ability to change the world. His high appraisal of himself and his skills led him to impose his vision of hope on others. Hope is complicated. The unchecked optimism of Robert Owens is an example of hope gone wrong. Hope is arrogance and ego. Reverend Nancy MacDonald Ladd explains that Owens represents historical tendencies in liberal religion which are still with us. A tendency to profess universalist ideals, but to practically continue centering white people and those who are privileged. An unwillingness for privileged reformers to perceive or atone for the ways they benefit from the oppression of others. A habit, she writes, of, quote, parachuting in from out of town or out of context on projects of benevolent paternalism, not grounded in authentic relationship to the communities affected. We see this pattern of paternalistic philanthropy in our world today. It shows up in models of philanthropy which allow the rich and powerful to impose their vision of a better world on others, rather than asking what impacted communities need. In the ultra-wealthy seeking to solve hunger in distant places by imposing technological solutions like industrial farming, a model of top-down change-making rooted in arrogance and certainty rather than models of mutuality and mutual empowerment. But there is a deeper and a truer hope, a hope that is honest and sees reality, a hope beyond unchecked optimism. The first feature of a deeper and truer hope can be found in the hope of a wider story. In After the Good News, MacDonald Ladd also addresses the limitations of optimism in worship services. In the Protestant tradition from which we come, ministers preach the good news. Of course, for many Christians, the good news is a phrase that can only mean talking about Jesus. Unitarian Universalist ministers have more freedom in what they can preach. But this expectation of preaching the good news lives on in a broader way. There's enormous pressure to uplift some kind of good news in worship, a message of hope, a way that individuals can contribute, and opportunities to change the world. And this hopeful model of ministry isn't bad. It can be healing and meaningful and essential. But it's a problem when worship can only tolerate the good news, when worship doesn't make any space for things that are complex, when the message privileges optimism over authenticity. Good news isn't the whole story. Sometimes tragedy strikes. Sometimes we're met with losses beyond comprehension. Worship services which explicitly make space for grief are so powerful. A candlelit vigil after a traumatic event. A memorial service impactful in its honesty and simplicity. Services of lamentation that invite congregants to show up feeling hopeless. Worship services that hold space for uncertainty. Good news isn't the whole story. We're not meant for endless optimism. We're human beings with complex lives touched by suffering. There's another angle to this. While good news isn't the whole story, suffering isn't the whole story either. As a Unitarian Universalist attending a progressive Christian seminary, I learned a lot about hope from my Christian classmates. For them, the religious story of the resurrection shapes their thinking about hope and offers a narrative about hope that's broader than the actions of individual people. In the week leading up to Easter, known as Holy Week, my classmates followed Christian traditions that took them on an emotional journey through Jesus' ministry, death, and resurrection. And when reflecting on this story, my classmates would share a powerful phrase. The phrase is, "Suffering doesn't have the last word." I find a deeper and truer hope in the wider story that suffering doesn't have the last word. I trust in the turning of the seasons, in natural cycles of birth, death, compost, and rebirth. I trust in the model of nurse logs that we find in our own rainforests, dead trees offering their trunks to support new saplings, life growing out of death. Suffering doesn't have the last word. Even when suffering feels inescapable, even in the aftermath of tragedy, even when any reality besides suffering seems impossible, suffering isn't the end of the sentence. There's always another day. There's always a little more space, a little more kindness. In the words of the hymn, there is more love somewhere. Another source of a deeper and truer hope comes from a hope which creates space rather than covers over. On occasion, I listen to guided meditations by the Buddhist teacher Tara Brach. She offers prompts during the meditation to awaken presence and to awaken feelings of aliveness during meditation. One of these prompts is to bring a small smile to the corners of the mouth during meditation, and to gradually bring this feeling of a small smile to other parts of the body, like the eyes or the heart. In her meditations, Brock calls this small smile a smile not to cover over, but to open up space for what's here. a smile to create space for possibility. There are studies which report that making yourself smile can trigger neurological processes to reduce risk and kick up feel-good hormones like serotonin, dopamine, and endorphins. Of course, we need to accept reality. Forcing a smile to cover over your feelings and pretending to be happy when you're not can deepen feelings of inauthenticity. Tara Brach offers a middle path between seeing what is and faking happiness. Trying a slight smile at the corners of the mouth as an opening and invitation, creating space, not covering over. Hope is like this too. Forcing capital H hope when you're in despair feels inauthentic. Assuming that you can only be accepted by others through faking hope deepens feelings of isolation and difference. But engaging hope, like the smallest smile at the corners of your lips, can create inner space. This can awaken the possibility of resilience. An active process of engaging hope, like a small smile, might awaken an inner process allowing authentic hope to grow. In her essay on hope, the journalist Krista Tippett writes, "Hope is a muscle, a practice, a choice. To live open-eyed and wholehearted in the world as it is, and not as we wish it to be." The California-based religious educator Lila Ibrahim creates a song with profound lyrics for Chalice Camp, a UU elementary day camp. One line of the song comes from the 13th century Sufi Muslim poet Rumi. The lyrics are theological statements and read as follows. "It's a blessing you were born, and it matters what you do. What you know about God is a piece of the truth. May the beauty you love be what you do, and you don't have to do it alone." The model of Chalice Camp was picked up by many UU congregations based on the content originally produced by Ibrahim's congregation. I used this model and these lyrics as a religious educator in Seattle. These short and memorable statements stick with me, especially the last one. You don't have to do it alone. This is my third source of a deeper and truer hope. We don't have to do it alone. We can't change the world alone. In fact, trying to change the world by ourselves can be harmful, as we saw with Robert Owens and his failed utopia. There is no singular action one ordinary person can take that will change the world. But luckily, we're not alone. We're embedded in communities, in congregations, in movements where we can work together for change and justice. Even if our worst fears are realized and it's impossible to halt something like climate change, there is still space for hope, though this hope might look different than we imagined. In the book A Paradise Built in Hell, Rebecca Solnit opens with an account of 8-year-old Dorothy Day watching the aftermath of the 1906 San Francisco earthquake. The disaster must have been terrifying for a small child. But after the earthquake, what Dorothy Day remembered were people helping each other, people sharing food and clothing, helping each other set up tents, creating community in the wake of disaster. Day was later called to a life of socialist activism and care for the poor as a founder of the Catholic worker movement. Dorothy Day wrote in her autobiography of the earthquake, "While the crisis lasted, people loved each other." We tend to imagine disasters will only awaken the ugliest parts of people. Rebecca Solnit offers a counter-narrative exploring the many ways people care for each other in the wake of disaster. Rather than fighting for resources or reacting with violence, people often rise to the occasion of crisis with purposefulness and longing to create community. Solnit argues that disasters actually worsen when governmental and humanitarian responses assume the worst about people, for example, by thinking that they need to contain violence or looting. Even in the most somber circumstances, there is still hope. There's hope in the community which arises in the midst of crisis. Hope is complex. Hope can be used to silence or cover over what's real. Hope can be misapplied as arrogant optimism imposed on others by the privileged, but there is a deeper and truer hope. There is a deeper and truer hope in a wider story, in hope which creates space rather than covers over. And there's hope in community, in the truth that we don't have to do it alone. May it be so, and blessed be. Our closing song is hymn number 131, Love Will Guide Us. Please stand as you're willing and able.
Love will guide us, peace has tried us, hope inside us will lead the way on the road from greed to giving. Love will guide us through the hard night. If you cannot sing like angels, if you cannot speak before thousands, you can give from deep within you. You can change the world with your love. Love will guide us, peace has tried us, love inside us will lead the way on the road from greed to giving. Love will guide us through the hard night.
We extinguish our flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, the fire of commitment, or the power of transformation. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Next week, Reverend Kate Kinney will be speaking on the topic of pilgrimages, inner and outer. We hope you can join us. Our postlude today comprises of two of Stephen Jackman's most delightful pieces, Bluebird and Cat on the Prowl, as played by Otto with Sheila Harwood.